The desert sun scorched the base in a relentless glare, turning every metal surface into a blistering sheet and every shadow into a mirage. Soldiers shuffled about, checking their weapons, scanning the horizon and whispering rumors. A new arrival had changed the rhythm of the camp, or rather the rumor of the arrival. The man in question was brought in on a Humvee under heavy guard, arms cuffed, eyes hidden behind dark goggles. No one knew his name, and that was enough to ignite speculation. Inside the holding tent, the prisoner sat on a metal cot, posture perfect despite exhaustion, silence encasing him like armor. The young recruits tried to make jokes, tossing scraps of food toward him, laughing at his refusal to acknowledge them. He didn't flinch, he didn't look up. He simply sat, calm as if the desert itself had whispered secrets to him. "What's he waiting for?" one soldier muttered to another, shaking his head. But even in jest, the question lingered in the air. Private Jacobs, barely 20, watched from across the tent, sensing a weight to this man that none of his peers could grasp. There was a strange composure about him, not arrogance, not defiance, just a quiet calculation that made Jacobs uncomfortable. The other soldiers mocked him without hesitation, calling him the ghost for his stillness, his unwavering gaze, and his silence. They joked he was either a traitor or a deserter, a man broken by some hidden betrayal. But Jacobs noticed the sharp angles of his jaw, the slight twitch in his left eye when he scanned the room, the faint scar slicing across his temple, signs of someone who had endured far more than any of them could imagine. The base commander, Colonel Briggs, dismissed the prisoner as unimportant. "Keep him contained," he instructed, leaning against a folding table with arms crossed. "He's no one's concern, and we don't have time for theatrics." But even Briggs felt an unspoken tension, a prickle at the back of his neck. Something in the man's posture, the way he seemed to see into the tent walls themselves, made the seasoned officer uneasy. Time dragged. The prisoner did not sleep, did not eat, and refused to speak. At night, the desert winds whipped sand through the barbed wire perimeter, rattling the fences and lifting the dust in ghostly swirls. Soldiers huddled in bunkers or circled the perimeter, sharing stories to keep fear at bay. Yet despite the laughter and bravado, there was an undercurrent of anxiety. Sometimes, when the wind howled through the base, Jacob swore he heard a voice, calm and low, echoing, "They're already here." No one else seemed to notice, or perhaps they chose not to, but the words burned in Jacob's mind. He had learned in the few months he had been stationed here that the desert had a way of revealing truth in its silence and hiding danger in the same stillness. The prisoner's calm was not weakness, it was awareness, and awareness in this place was deadly. The soldiers who mocked him were careless. They leaned too close, laughed too loudly, dropped their weapons and helmets as if the tent were a playground. Yet every small movement Ward, the man would reveal his name later, made in response to their antics was precise, measured. He did not respond physically, but Jacobs caught tiny gestures, a flicker of his gaze toward the perimeter, a slight shift in his shoulders, a subtle tensing of muscles as though anticipating action. There was a rhythm to it, a silent pattern, and Jacobs' stomach churned with unease. Word spread quickly among the base that something about this prisoner was different. The cooks whispered as they carried trays past his cot. The medics muttered while checking vitals. Even the engineers, who rarely spoke, paused when they passed. He was not human in the way they understood. He was something else, a force contained by restraints, a storm held at bay by nothing more than calm. And then he spoke. The first word startled everyone. It was a low, deliberate voice, barely rising above the hum of the fans in the tent. "They're already here." The tent went silent. Laughter died on the lips of the soldiers who had been mocking him moments before. Even Colonel Briggs straightened, hand resting on his sidearm. "What did you say?" he demanded, stepping closer. "They're already here," the prisoner repeated, tone flat, unflinching. His eyes met Jacob's, piercing like sunlight reflecting off metal. "If you do not see them yet, you will." Questions exploded in the tent. Who? When? How? The prisoner offered nothing more. He simply returned to his silent vigil, eyes scanning the horizon, calm as the desert itself. and the base seemed smaller suddenly, vulnerable, as if the walls could no longer protect them from what might be coming. That night Jacobs lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling. Every creak of metal, every distant howl of wind felt like a warning. He could not shake the feeling that the prisoner had seen something the rest of them hadn't, something terrible, precise, and unstoppable. Even the bravest soldiers murmured nervously, claiming exhaustion, but Jacobs knew better. There was a predator on the horizon, and Ward, the man they mocked as a weak, useless captive, somehow knew exactly where it was. Hours passed. Outside, the desert shifted, sand rolling like waves under a silent moon. The prisoner remained upright, unblinking, waiting. Jacobs finally whispered into the darkness, barely audible, "Who are you?" Ward's eyes flickered toward him, not with anger, not with recognition, but with understanding. "I am the one who sees," he said softly. "The one who survives when the rest cannot. And if they come, only those who listen will live." The words settled over Jacobs like a stone. Fear twisted into fascination. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain. The man they laughed at, mocked, and ignored was not a prisoner at all. He was a ghost, a force, a sentinel standing in the desert, and soon the entire base would see it. And somewhere beyond the wire and the endless dunes of sand, something shifted. A glint of metal caught the moonlight. Eyes watched. Calculations were made. And the first strike was only hours away. The desert night pressed down on the base like a living thing, suffocating and relentless. Sand whispered across the fences, curling into corners, swirling around boots and tents as though the very ground were moving beneath their feet. The soldiers had tried to ignore the prisoner's warning. "They're already here." But unease was gnawing at every man and woman on the compound. Even the most experienced troops could feel it. The kind of silence that didn't promise peace, but patience, waiting for the storm to strike. Private Jacobs couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot, staring at the tent ceiling, counting every creak of metal, every sigh of the wind, every distant howl from the dunes. He thought he might be imagining things, until a faint flash of movement in the perimeter caught his eye. A shadow too smooth, too deliberate, weaving between rocks and sand dunes as if it were breathing in sync with the desert itself. His stomach turned. He knew instinctively that this wasn't a patrol or a stray animal. Something was out there, watching, calculating. The next morning brought little comfort. Ward, the prisoner, had eaten nothing and spoken even less. Yet there was a new energy in him, something like readiness, a predator waiting for prey. He did not flinch at the rising sun, did not blink at the soldiers who continued their mockery. Instead, he studied the horizon, lips moving ever so slightly as if counting seconds, measuring distances, assessing angles. Private Jacobs noticed it again, a quiet intelligence, almost supernatural in its patience. "He's not broken," Jacobs whispered to his bunkmate. "He's waiting." Rumors swirled through the base. The cook swore he had seen figures moving along the ridge, too large and deliberate to be wind shadows. The medics reported equipment failures, radios dying mid-communication, cameras blinking and going dark, sensors giving false readings. Colonel Briggs dismissed it all as desert anomalies, heat, sand, and fatigue playing tricks on the mind. But Jacobs, watching Ward, knew better. The prisoner seemed to anticipate every interference, every crackle of static, every slight twitch of a soldier's hand. It was as though he had already measured the chaos before it happened. By midday, the tension had escalated to near panic. A drone dispatched to patrol the outskirts failed to return. Its feed went dark, replaced by static, then a single chilling frame. A blurred figure moving at impossible speed across the dunes, carrying what appeared to be a rifle. Soldiers gathered around the monitor, shouting, demanding answers, blaming technical faults, environmental interference, anything to make sense of it. But Jacobs could see it clearly. The figure moved with intention, calculated like a predator stalking a prey it already knew was trapped. Ward, seated in his cell with his back straight, muttered almost inaudibly, "They've found the blind spots." Private Jacobs leaned close, heart pounding. Who found them?" Ward's eyes flicked toward him. The first human contact in days, and he spoke with that same unnerving calm. "The ones who are coming, you will see them soon. Those who mock and doubt, they will not survive the lesson." Briggs overheard the conversation and stormed over, fury and disbelief warring on his face. "That's enough," he barked. "No one knows what you're talking about. You're a prisoner, not a prophet. Sit down and shut up." Ward's gaze did not shift. "Prophecy is irrelevant," he said quietly. "Preparation is survival, and your time to prepare is ending." The colonel's jaw tightened, but there was an undeniable prickle of fear at the back of his neck. He brushed it aside. "Officers don't believe in ghosts. They only respond to reports and orders." Despite the command's dismissal, soldiers began noticing subtle, impossible details. Small footprints in the sand that shouldn't exist, shimmering glints on rocks where nothing had been before, equipment malfunctions localized in precise spots, radios dying only in certain tents, lights flickering in areas previously cleared. Even the perimeter cameras, carefully monitored, seemed to be obstructed in ways that explanation. Anxiety spread like wildfire. Private Jacobs, normally quiet and obedient, began speaking in whispers to anyone who would listen, warning that the prisoner's predictions were coming true. Few took him seriously, but every one of them noticed a growing tension in the air, as if the desert itself were holding its breath. That afternoon, Ward requested to see only one person, the base sniper unit commander. The soldiers laughed at the absurdity, mocking him openly. "You want to meet our deadliest shooters? Ha, you'll be lucky if they even glance at you." Ward's eyes didn't flicker. "I need to speak to them before it begins. They will understand why it matters." The mocking grew louder. Ward leaned forward slightly, voice dropping into a chilling whisper. "Or they will die before learning what they could have known." At the perimeter, distant figures began to appear, barely visible at first, like black stains on the horizon. The soldiers raised their binoculars, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Something about the movement was unnerving, smooth, controlled, and impossibly precise. These weren't scattered insurgents. They weren't panicked, untrained, or predictable. They moved with purpose, formation, and deadly intent. Jacob's pulse raced. The prisoner's warning was no longer just words. It was prophecy, unfolding before their very eyes. Inside the tent, Ward stood, finally breaking his long silence. His presence filled the space with a gravity that demanded attention. "They know every path, every weak point, every blind spot. If you continue as you are, they will pass through the wire like it isn't even there. I can stop them, but only if I am free to act." The colonel's face turned red with disbelief. "And why should I believe you? You're a captive, a supposed traitor. You have nothing to prove." Ward's reply was simple, unyielding. "I've already proven it, in your ignorance, in your fear, in the mistakes you refuse to see. The clock is ticking. Listen or regret it." Jacobs realized in that moment that Ward wasn't just waiting for the enemy. He was waiting for someone to finally understand the truth and act on it. Around them, the base hummed with nervous activity. Soldiers triple-checked weapons, bunkers were reinforced. Eyes scanned every shadow, every ridge, every wisp of desert wind. But even with all precautions, a gnawing fear lingered. No one knew what was coming, only that it would be swift, brutal, and unstoppable if they weren't ready. Hours later, as the sun dipped behind distant dunes, the first flickers of movement grew into clarity. Figures on the horizon moved in perfect synchronization. A faint glint of metal caught the last rays of sunlight. Drones buzzed but failed to capture them accurately, sensors blipped, and radio static filled the air. Private Jacob's stomach knotted. He finally understood what the prisoner had meant. Ward had not been joking. He had not been insane. The enemy was already here, precise, lethal, and watching every move, every heartbeat of the soldiers who had mocked the man they called the Ghost. Ward leaned against the bars of his cell, silent again, watching. The desert wind whipped his hair, stung his eyes, and carried with it the faintest metallic scent, the scent of inevitability. Jacobs realized that the night ahead would be long, and that survival depended not on laughter, not on bravado, not on orders from a commander who refused to see, but on understanding and trusting the prisoner, the man who already knew how this battle would unfold. The last light of day vanished, leaving the base shrouded in shadows. Somewhere beyond the wire, movement continued, precise and unstoppable. Inside, Ward whispered once more, quiet enough for Jacobs alone to hear. "Soon you will see. Those who mocked me will see. And those who do not believe will not survive the night." The desert held its breath, and the first strike was imminent. Night had left the desert in an endless expanse of black, broken only by the glimmering lights of the base and the distant shimmer of sand dunes. Every soldier felt it, the oppressive quiet before a storm, the kind that gnaws at the mind until nerves are raw and eyes twitch at shadows. Private Jacobs sat on the edge of his cot, scanning the perimeter once again, certain that whatever Ward had warned them about was drawing closer. And then, over the low hum of generators, a distant rumble reached their ears. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a convoy. It was something else, something approaching. The rumble grew into the unmistakable sound of heavy vehicles rolling across sand, tracks crunching over rock and dust. Lights flickered on in the distance. The soldiers scrambled toward the main gate, weapons raised, eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. Colonel Briggs barked orders, insisting on standard procedure, though every instinct in his body screamed that the situation was beyond protocol. From the horizon emerged a convoy of armored Humvees, silent and precise, each vehicle adorned with dark camo patterns and low-profile markings. Out stepped the elite sniper unit Echo 7, 5 men moving with the quiet precision of shadows. Each carried a sniper rifle, a spotting scope, and a weight of history in their eyes. Their leader, Master Sergeant Cole Tanner, stepped forward. He was tall, lean, and every movement deliberate, almost measured to the millimeter. His gaze swept over the base with a predator's attention, stopping only when it landed on the prisoner. Tanner froze. The blood drained slightly from his face. He whispered almost to himself, "Ward, Ward." The name hung in the air like a bomb about to detonate. Murmurs rippled through the soldiers. The prisoner, silent for days, mocked, ignored, treated as nothing, was suddenly the epicenter of attention. Briggs stiffened, disbelief turning into suspicion. "That man is a captive," he barked, voice raised. "You have no authority to." Tanner's eyes, icy and unwavering, met Briggs in a glare that silenced the room. "He is not a prisoner. He is one of us. And if you refuse to release him, I take responsibility for what comes next." Ward, still seated, looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, steady, but carried the weight of someone who had seen more death than any of them could imagine. He said nothing at first. Then, softly, deliberately, "It's them. They've found the blind spots. Only now you will understand why I came." The room erupted in questions. Who was he? How did he know? Why was he here? Tanner stepped closer, voice low and tense. 2 years ago, during a covert operation in Kandahar, Ward went missing, presumed dead, tortured, never recovered. His voice faltered. Memories, guilt, and anger coiled in him like a living thing. "I was in charge of the mission. I should have brought him home. And now he's here, and he knew they were coming before anyone else did." Briggs' face reddened, a mixture of shame and fury. "You expect me to trust a man we've locked up as a suspect? A man we don't know?" Tanner's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "You have no choice. You can mock him, you can doubt him, but when they strike, every life in this base will depend on him, and every mistake you make in ignoring him will be a grave one." Ward finally stood, the first time in days. He moved with a soldier's precision, but there was a ghostly stillness to him, a sense that every motion had been practiced in nightmare scenarios that no one else could survive. "I've endured 2 years of captivity, interrogations, and loss," he said, voice quiet but carrying. "I've seen every angle, every approach, every threat they could muster. I did not come back for revenge. I came back so you could live, but only if you trust me." The soldiers, who had spent days mocking him, now watched in silent awe. Private Jacobs felt his chest tighten. He realized that every story he had heard about Ward, the missing sniper, the ghost, was true. The man had not been captured by mistake. He had survived when everyone believed him dead, and he had returned with knowledge that could save them. Tanner motioned for Ward to follow him. "We have to assess the perimeter. They'll be here by dawn. Every weak point, every approach they could use has been accounted for. I need you to see it too." They'll move fast. They'll move clean. And if we don't act, they will be through the wire before anyone knows what hit them. Briggs, still furious but unwilling to ignore the reality unfolding, reluctantly allowed Ward to leave the cell under Tanner's supervision. Ward moved past the soldiers without a word, eyes scanning, body coiled like a spring. Every step carried authority and silent warning. Even the recruits who had mocked him now watched in awe, understanding, perhaps for the first time, the gravity of the situation. Outside, the desert wind had shifted. Figures in the distance were more than just shadows, they were shapes, moving with terrifying precision, glints of metal catching the last light. Ward's hand hovered near his sidearm, not in panic but anticipation. "They're coming through the eastern approach," he said quietly, almost to himself, "and they'll try to exploit the northern ridge first. Standard tactics, predictable but deadly if we aren't ready." Tanner nodded, silently approving. "You haven't lost it, Ghost. You've only grown sharper." Ward didn't respond, only adjusted his jacket, checking the angle of his rifle sling. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and loaded with intent. Private Jacobs noticed the calm in Ward's eyes. Not fear, not doubt, pure clarity. For the first time, he understood what true survival looked like. Briggs, standing nearby, watched the man who had been dismissed as a prisoner with a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. He realized too late that mockery, assumptions, and hesitation could have cost lives. Ward had come back not just alive, but prepared. He was not a threat. He was the shield. The night deepened. The desert whispered again, carrying with it the scent of impending violence, sand, metal, and the faint acrid smell of explosives waiting in hidden packs. Ward's gaze swept the horizon one final time. "They're almost here," he said, voice low, carrying across the stillness. "And when they arrive, the ones who doubted me will wish they had listened." Tanner stepped beside him. "Then let's make sure no one regrets it." Ward nodded once, almost imperceptibly. The ghost sniper was awake, and the base, long mocking and complacent, was about to learn that survival belonged to those who saw before others could. From the dunes, movement continued, deliberate, silent, unstoppable. Ward's prediction had not been a warning, it had been a calculation, and every second that passed brought the enemy closer. The desert night, endless and unfeeling, was about to erupt. And for the first time in days, the soldiers of the base understood the truth. The man they had laughed at would be their salvation, or the witness to their destruction. The night was thick, a black curtain pressing against the edges of the base. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the faint, metallic tang of danger, and the soldiers knew instinctively that whatever was coming, it would not give warning. Private Jacobs' hands trembled on the rifle strap as he scanned the perimeter, counting every shadow, every shift in the dunes. Somewhere beyond the fence, Ward's predictions had already become reality. And then it began. First came the distant booms, mortar shells slamming into the far edge of the base. The earth shook beneath their boots, sending dust and debris into the air. Soldiers shouted warnings, diving for cover, gripping weapons with white-knuckled fear. The first wave of attackers surged from the eastern dunes, moving with terrifying precision. It was not chaos. It was controlled, tactical, coordinated, almost surgical. The base erupted in confusion and panic. Briggs barked orders, trying to marshal the soldiers, but his voice was drowned out by the cacophony of explosions and gunfire. Private Jacobs felt the heat of the first mortars as they slammed into the sand behind his bunker, sending up clouds of smoke and embers. Screams and shouts echoed across the compound. Amid the chaos, a metal door of the prisoner's cell clanged open. Ward stepped out, unhurried, unflinching. Every soldier who had mocked him or whispered doubts froze. He moved toward the armory, his hands steady, every step purposeful. He did not look back. Behind him, Sergeant Tanner followed, the veteran sniper's eyes narrowed in concentration, tracking threats that the others could barely perceive. "You're not going to run," Tanner said, his voice low, almost intimate. "We fight where we stand. You ready?" Ward did not answer. He didn't need to. Every movement, every glance, every breath was already the answer. The armory was chaos. Soldiers scrambled to grab rifles, ammunition, and protective gear, but Ward moved like a shadow, selecting a sniper rifle with deliberate care. He adjusted the scope, tested the bolt, and slung it over his shoulder. Tanner handed him a spotting radio. "High tower, you've got line of sight. Take your shot, Ghost." Together they climbed to a metal tower that overlooked the eastern approach. From this vantage point, the enemy was a wave of dark shapes moving across sand, glinting with metal and intent. The first target appeared, a sniper lining up on a young soldier below. Ward's hand lifted, adjusted the scope, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing across the desert, and the threat was gone before the shooter even knew he was seen. Tanner's eyes widened, approving silently. "Still got it, huh?" he muttered. Ward's jaw tightened. Survival was not about ego. It was about precision. Below, soldiers who had mocked him now ducked behind cover, mouths open in disbelief. The ghost sniper was alive, lethal, and terrifyingly accurate. For every attacker that broke cover, Ward's rifle answered with deadly efficiency. He moved between targets with calm calculation, saving lives with every shot. Flashbacks flickered in Ward's mind 2 years ago in a failed covert mission in Kandahar. His team had been ambushed. He had stayed behind to protect Tanner and the others, taken captive, tortured, assumed dead. He had endured months of interrogation and isolation, emerging stronger, sharper, and more attuned to every threat. Now, every movement of the enemy before him triggered instincts honed in fire and blood. Private Jacobs watched from below, awe mixing with fear. The man they had ridiculed, called a traitor, called a ghost, he was now the single reason anyone had a chance to survive. Jacobs felt the weight of his own inadequacy, the mistakes he had made in underestimating Ward. He gritted his teeth, determined to hold his position, to follow every command, to survive. Outside, the enemy pressed closer, their tactics horrifyingly clean. They moved with coordination that suggested inside knowledge of the base. Briggs' earlier doubts became a pit of shame in his stomach. He realized too late that Ward's warnings were not arrogance or delusion. They were calculations drawn from years of experience and survival. The mortars continued, the night air filled with fire and smoke, and Ward's eyes never wavered. He calculated angles, distances, wind currents, and trajectories with almost supernatural precision. One enemy soldier tried to flank the base from the north. Ward caught the movement before Tanner even spotted it. Another shot, another life saved. In the chaos, Ward's mind replayed the memory of the mission that had claimed him. He remembered leaving Tanner's team behind to buy them time, the agonizing weight of failure, the screams, the blood, the dust choking the air. And now, standing over this base, he felt the same responsibility, the same drive to protect those who had underestimated him. Every heartbeat mattered. Every breath counted. Below, soldiers scrambled to adjust defenses, finally beginning to trust the prisoner they had once mocked. Briggs barked orders, but this time he did so while watching Ward move. His disbelief shifted into a cold, practical admiration. He realized that ridicule had been deadly foolish, that survival demanded respect and precision over ego. Hours passed. The enemy's waves hit and broke, only to regroup and attempt new angles. Ward and Tanner worked in tandem, rifles singing death across the dunes. Ward's calm and Tanner's experience created a deadly ballet, orchestrated over sand, smoke, and fire. Soldiers began murmuring to one another, voices trembling with awe and gratitude. The ghost they had mocked was the reason they were still alive. Amid the chaos, Ward's eyes flicked to Jacobs, giving him a barely perceptible nod. Followed by silent instructions: "Cover that ridge, keep moving, do not hesitate." Jacobs obeyed, heart racing, feeling the weight of life and death in every decision. Ward was no longer just a prisoner. He was a mentor, a savior, and the embodiment of discipline and survival. The first light of dawn approached. The enemy, relentless and precise, began to falter under the sustained accuracy of Ward and Tanner. Their carefully planned assault unraveled as one sniper shot after another neutralized threats before they could close the distance. The base, once threatened with destruction, now held firm. The soldiers' fear gradually transformed into relief and respect, their mockery replaced by awe and gratitude. Finally, Ward lowered his rifle for a moment, scanning the horizon. The desert was still. Smoke rose in thin spirals, dust swirled around the craters left behind. The first wave had been repelled. Lives had been saved. The soldiers who had once laughed now whispered prayers of thanks. Private Jacobs, breathless, felt a profound understanding settle in him. Some heroes didn't ask for recognition. Some survived to ensure others did. Ward was one of those heroes. Tanner approached, placing a firm hand on Ward's shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. Ward's eyes, hollowed by years of survival, met Tanner. "For now," he murmured. He knew the fight was not over. The night had tested them, but the desert was far from finished. And as the sun broke over the dunes, casting a golden glow across the battered base, Ward's presence remained unshakable, a sentinel, a ghost. A man who had been written off and had returned to prove that preparation, patience, and precision could save lives when chaos struck without mercy. The desert night still hummed with tension, though the first waves of attackers had been repelled. Smoke coiled in lazy spirals from distant craters, mingling with the acrid scent of spent gunpowder. Every soldier on the base moved with the rhythm of fear tempered by adrenaline. But above them, in the watchtower that overlooked the eastern approach, two men operated as if the chaos around them were an intricate chessboard rather than a battlefield. Ward's hands rested lightly on the sniper rifle, but his mind was already 3 steps ahead of the enemy. He tracked every shadow, every subtle movement of the attackers who remained hidden beyond dunes and ridges. Tanner, standing beside him with his spotting scope, followed the same path, eyes sharp and calculating. Their movements were synchronized, almost instinctive, a deadly dance honed over years of combat. "You see him?" Ward asked, voice low, precise. Tanner nodded. "North Ridge. He's lining up on the new recruits. Jacobs is exposed." Without hesitation, Ward adjusted his aim, calculating distance, wind direction, the weight of the rifle, even the tiniest tremor in his own pulse. He exhaled once, held his breath, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, echoing across the desert, and the enemy sniper went down before he even fully raised his weapon. "Good shot," Tanner muttered almost grudgingly. "Still got the touch." Ward did not smile. There was no joy in this. Every life spared was a debt owed to fate, every second a reminder of the 2 years he had endured captivity, torture, and isolation. The ghost sniper had survived when others assumed him dead. Now, survival was no longer for himself. It belonged to the soldiers below, the very men who had mocked him, underestimated him, and dismissed his warnings. Below, Private Jacobs crouched behind the sandbags, heart pounding. Every shot Ward took was a reminder that life and death hung on a thread, one that the young soldier could barely comprehend. His fear was tempered by awe, admiration, and a growing determination to survive and do his part. Ward had become more than a savior. He was a mentor in real time, guiding lives with a quiet authority that no command structure could replicate. The enemy forces were relentless. They adjusted tactics, spreading into smaller units trying to flank the base from the north and west. Ward anticipated each movement. His mind flashed back to Kandahar, to the ambush that had claimed his team, to Tanner's reliance on him in life-or-death moments. He remembered leaving Tanner behind to save others, enduring torture and isolation so that someone might live. Now, he was repaying that debt. Each shot, each command, each warning over the radio was redemption, not for himself, but for those who had survived because of him. "2 on the ridge," Tanner whispered. "They're closing fast." Ward adjusted his scope, eyes narrowing. He took into account the distance, the slight gust of wind, the uneven terrain. His breathing slowed, measured, controlled. 1 shot, 2, 3, each precise, each fatal. The attackers faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks as they realized that the base was not defenseless, that the so-called prisoner they had ignored was an unseen predator above them. Flashbacks cut through Ward's concentration, memories he had tried to bury. He remembered the mission gone wrong, the screams, the fire, the weight of failure pressing down on him as he hid, bleeding, in the enemy's custody. He had survived because of patience, calculation, and a refusal to die until he had a purpose. That purpose had returned with him to this base. "Sniper East," one soldier shouted from below, panic in his voice. Ward raised his scope, saw the glint of a rifle catching moonlight, and exhaled slowly. The shot rang out, clean and precise. The attacker dropped, never to rise. Tanner followed with a nod, spotting additional targets. "Covering the ridge," he muttered. "We won't let them through." Every shot was a life saved. Every life saved was a moment of redemption for Ward. But it was more than that. It was proof of resilience, proof that endurance, skill, and focus could turn the tide against impossible odds. The soldiers below, who had laughed and mocked him, now fought with renewed vigor. Briggs barked orders with urgency and clarity, his own disbelief giving way to respect for the man who had returned from death to command the battle from above. The night dragged on. Attack after attack came in waves, but Ward and Tanner maintained an unbroken rhythm. Their rifles cracked across the desert, each bullet a lifeline. Below, soldiers followed commands with precision, moving strategically to reinforce weak points, protect the wounded, and hold the line. The base, once vulnerable, had become a fortress of deadly coordination, thanks to two men working as one. Ward's mind, though focused, wandered to the men he had left behind 2 years ago, the ones he could not save. He felt the weight of every life in his hands. Each trigger pull was more than survival. It was penance, responsibility, and affirmation. Tanner noticed his momentary pause. "Focus, Ghost," he said softly. "They don't get second chances, and neither do we." Ward nodded, bringing his attention fully back to the horizon. Movement flickered again, a coordinated push from the northern flank. He signaled Jacobs to move into a defensive position, guiding him with silent gestures and whispered commands. The young soldier obeyed, realizing that the man above him was not just skilled, he was instinct itself. Hours passed like seconds. The enemy grew desperate, attempting increasingly reckless maneuvers, only to be cut down before they could breach the base. Ward's mind never wavered, calculating, anticipating, correcting. Tanner watched him, pride tempered by the knowledge of what this man had endured. "You've redeemed yourself 1,000 times over," Tanner said quietly. Finally, as the first pale light of dawn began to break over the horizon, the last of the attackers retreated, disorganized and demoralized. Ward lowered his rifle, eyes scanning the horizon one last time. The desert was quiet now, save for the smoke curling from craters and the soft moans of wounded men. Every life saved was a testament to endurance, skill, and courage. Ward climbed down from the tower, limping slightly but composed. Soldiers who had once mocked him now looked at him with awe and reverence. Briggs approached, humility and shame etched across his face. I misjudged you," he said. Ward's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "It's not about judgment," Ward replied softly. "It's about survival, and you survived because you finally listened." Private Jacobs followed closely behind, heart pounding, feeling the weight of the night's lessons. He had witnessed heroism, precision, and redemption in real time. Ward's actions were not only a lifeline but a mirror showing what courage and experience truly meant. As the sun rose, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Ward surveyed the base. Broken walls, scattered debris, and the exhausted soldiers were all visible beneath him. Yet, amidst the destruction, there was triumph. They had survived because a man who had been written off as dead, mocked as a prisoner, had returned with clarity, precision, and unshakable determination. The ghost sniper Ward had claimed his redemption, not through glory or recognition, but through the lives he had preserved, the mistakes he had corrected, and the lesson he had imparted. In war, in life, and in survival, preparation, patience, and resolve can turn the tide, even against the impossible. The first light of dawn crept across the desert, softening the harsh edges of the battlefield with pale gold and crimson hues. Smoke still curled lazily from craters, carrying the scent of gunpowder, scorched earth, and the bitter tang of survival. Silence had returned to the base, though it was the heavy, almost reverential kind, the quiet of lives spared, of chaos past, and of men who had seen death dance and survived. Soldiers emerged from bunkers, tents, and foxholes like ghosts, blinking against the rising sun. Many were wounded, some scorched, all exhausted. They looked around, taking in the devastation. Broken walls, scattered gear, sand churned into unnatural patterns by explosions. Their laughter, bravado, and mockery had vanished overnight, replaced by awe and a deep, pervasive humility. Survival had come at a price, and they all knew it. Private Jacob stumbled from behind a sandbag, sweat and grime streaking his face. His legs shook, but his eyes were fixed on the man who had changed everything. Ward. The prisoner, once mocked, ignored, dismissed, was now the reason anyone had survived the siege. Ward moved slowly across the compound, surveying the damage, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder, his gaze steady but tired. There was no triumph in his expression, only the quiet, unspoken knowledge that survival had come at a cost. Colonel Briggs approached him, face a mask of disbelief and reluctant respect. He had spent the night barking orders, witnessing chaos unfold, and finally understanding the truth. Ward had been right, and the base had survived because of him. Briggs extended a hand, then hesitated, uncertain if he could bridge the gap between authority, error, and gratitude. "Ward," he began, voice rough with emotion. I misjudged you. Every warning, every word, I should have listened." Ward's eyes met Briggs'. There was no anger, no vindication, only the calm authority of a man who had endured more than anyone could imagine. "It's not about being judged," Ward said quietly. "It's about being prepared. And now we survived because someone finally did." Tanner approached from the tower, still carrying his rifle, eyes scanning the horizon even as his body screamed for rest. He stopped beside Ward, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You did what you had to," Tanner said. "You saved lives, that's all that matters." Ward nodded once, a faint acknowledgement of the truth Tanner had spoken. Below, soldiers moved to assist the wounded, checking on each other, distributing water, and accounting for those lost in the chaos. For the first time in days, they looked to Ward and Tanner not as superiors or prisoners, but as saviors. Murmurs spread among the ranks. "That's Ward," someone whispered. "The ghost sniper." And for the first time, the name carried respect, not fear or mockery. Jacobs watched the exchange with awe. He had mocked Ward in his mind, judged him based on rumor and circumstance. Now he understood the depth of Ward's skill, the precision of his mind, and the unshakable calm of his heart. Every shot, every command, every assessment from the tower had been flawless. Every life saved was proof. Jacobs felt a mix of relief, admiration, and an almost overwhelming gratitude. Ward had returned from death to save them all, and in doing so, had changed their understanding of courage and sacrifice. Ward moved through the base, speaking quietly to soldiers, giving instructions where necessary, guiding medics, and directing defensive teams to reinforce weak points. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and imbued with authority born from experience. He did not celebrate victory. There was no triumphalism in his demeanor, only a quiet, deadly calm, the calm of a man who had survived far worse and had returned with a purpose beyond recognition or reward. Briggs followed him, eyes scanning the battlefield with a new perspective. He saw the broken terrain, the scattered debris, and the exhausted soldiers, but he also saw the difference Ward had made. He realized the error of his previous judgment. Mockery, doubt, and rigid protocol could have cost them everything. Ward's return had not been luck. It had been skill, precision, and endurance. A few soldiers approached Ward cautiously, offering nods, brief handshakes, or whispered thanks. Ward acknowledged them with a faint nod or a quiet word of reassurance. He did not linger. He had come for survival, not accolades. His presence alone had been enough to shift the course of events, and he carried himself as if nothing more was required. Jacobs followed, still absorbing the gravity of what had occurred. He remembered the fear, the doubt, the mockery that had dominated the days before the siege. Now those memories felt like a different lifetime. Ward had transformed the base, reshaped the soldiers, understanding of trust and capability, and left an imprint that would linger far longer than the night's violence. Ward stopped at the perimeter fence, hands resting lightly on the metal. He surveyed the dunes where the enemy had surged and retreated, noting the patterns of their attack, the efficiency of their movements, and the chaos that had been sown. Despite the victory, his mind was already calculating, already anticipating future threats. Survival had never been static, and Ward's mind remained sharp, always planning, always calculating. Tanner joined him, standing silently as they both scanned the horizon. "You've saved more than lives tonight," Tanner said softly. "You've reminded everyone here what it means to fight, to endure, and to survive." Ward's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not about reminders," he replied. "It's about ensuring that those who can survive do survive. The rest are just memories." Briggs approached once more, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The colonel had learned a harsh lesson in humility, judgment, and the value of listening. He looked at Ward not as a prisoner, not as a ghost, but as a soldier, a savior, and a force that had turned the tide of fate. As the sun rose fully over the desert, the survivors began to rebuild. Bunkers were repaired, supplies redistributed, and soldiers began patching wounds, both physical and psychological. The cost had been high, but lives had been spared, and the lessons learned would not be forgotten. Ward's presence had not only ensured survival but had reshaped the culture of the base. Mockery, arrogance, and doubt had been replaced with respect, trust, and vigilance. Private Jacob stood quietly, watching Ward disappear among the tents, giving orders, assisting wounded soldiers, and ensuring the base was secure. He felt a profound respect, a deep sense of gratitude, and a stirring understanding of courage, skill, and leadership. Ward had survived unimaginable hardship and returned not for vengeance, not for glory, but to save lives. In doing so, he had become more than a soldier. He had become a legend in their eyes. By mid-morning, the base had quieted. The wounded were treated, the dead accounted for, and the remaining enemy forces retreated beyond the dunes. The battle was over, but the memories of the siege lingered like smoke in the desert. Ward walked among the soldiers, a silent sentinel ensuring the aftermath was managed, giving guidance where needed, and never lingering for thanks or recognition. Jacobs approached him one last time, eyes wide with admiration. "Thank you," he said quietly. You saved us all." Ward looked at him, calm and steady as if weighing the words. "I didn't save anyone," he replied softly. "I just did what needed to be done. The rest was up to you." Tanner joined them, watching Ward with quiet pride. "Some men fight for survival," Tanner said. "Some fight for redemption. You did both tonight." Ward nodded once, a faint acknowledgement. He did not linger, knowing the desert, the world, and the threats beyond the fence required constant vigilance. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the desert and battered base, Ward's presence remained unshakable. The soldiers, once mocking and skeptical, now moved with a renewed sense of purpose and understanding. Ward had endured, survived, and returned to ensure that others could do the same. The ghost sniper had not sought recognition, but his actions had cemented a legacy that would be remembered long after the battle ended. And somewhere beyond the dunes, silent and unseen, movement stirred once again, a reminder that in the desert, vigilance never ends, and survival is a lesson that must be relearned every day. Ward watched, ready, unyielding, and forever the sentinel who saw before anyone else could. The morning sun cast long shadows over the base, revealing the full extent of the night's chaos. Smoke lingered in the air, dust coated every surface, and the wounded were being treated in hastily reinforced tents. Soldiers moved with weary urgency, still shaken by the events of the siege, their minds replaying the precision, the calm and the deadly skill of the man they had once mocked. Ward, the ghost sniper, moved quietly among them, issuing instructions, checking defenses, and ensuring that every survivor was accounted for. Yet despite the immediate threats having passed, questions remained. Who had coordinated the enemy attack with such precision? How had they known the blind spots of the base? And above all, how had Ward anticipated it all? Brigadier General Hayes, recently flown in to oversee the investigation, called for a full debriefing. Officers, medics, and surviving soldiers gathered in the command tent, tense and exhausted, ready to piece together the truth. Ward was summoned to the center of the tent. He stood silently, allowing the murmurs to settle before speaking. "The enemy forces you faced last night," he began, "were not disorganized. They were trained, coordinated, and informed. Their movements suggested someone had knowledge of your base's defenses, patrol schedules, and blind spots. The pattern is clear. This was not chance. It was intelligence-driven, precise, and relentless." Gasps rippled through the room. Soldiers who had fought bravely now exchanged nervous glances. Briggs, standing stiffly near the tent entrance, clenched his jaw. "You mean someone inside?" he asked, voice low but filled with suspicion. Ward nodded. "It's possible, or someone who had access to detailed surveillance. Either way, this was no ordinary attack. It was a test, and they misjudged us." General Hayes leaned forward, voice firm but respectful. "And what about you, Ward? How did you anticipate this? You've been missing for 2 years. No one expected you to survive captivity, yet you knew the enemy's approach, their tactics, and even the timing." Ward's gaze was steady, measured. "Experience and observation," he said simply. "I've survived situations designed to break men, captivity, torture, isolation. During that time, I learned to read movement, predict patterns, and anticipate threats. When I returned, I applied the same principles. The base's survival depended on acting before the enemy did, not after." Tanner stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Ward's shoulder. "I've known him for years," Tanner said. "He's not lucky. He's methodical, precise, and always thinking ahead. The ghost sniper doesn't just react, he calculates, anticipates, and survives where others would fail. Last night, every life saved can be traced to his foresight." Private Jacobs, standing near the back, raised his voice hesitantly. "Sir, I didn't understand him at first. I mocked him like everyone else. But I saw what he did. Every shot, every command, every prediction saved us. He's not just a sniper, he's something else." The room remained silent, absorbing the gravity of the statement. The soldiers around him nodded in agreement, some rubbing their temples, realizing the depth of their misjudgment. Ward continued. "2 years ago, during a mission in Kandahar, my team was ambushed. I stayed behind to cover my squad's retreat, was captured, and endured months of torture. They wanted information, locations, team movements, plans. I survived because I refused to break, because I learned to anticipate their every move. I return now, not for revenge, not for recognition, but to ensure that lives were protected, that the same mistakes I witnessed then would not be repeated." Briggs, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. His voice carried a mixture of shame and newfound respect. "Ward, we underestimated you. We mocked you. We assumed you were a liability. Last night you were the only thing that kept us alive." Ward's eyes met his. "It's not about being underestimated," he said. "It's about survival, and survival depends on preparation, awareness, and trust. Without trust, even the most skilled soldier cannot succeed." The room fell silent for a moment, the words sinking in. Soldiers reflected on the night, the panic, the precision of the enemy, and the deadly calm of the man they had mocked. They realized that Ward's return had been more than a tactical advantage. It had been a lesson in humility, vigilance, and respect for those who endure hardships beyond comprehension. General Hayes motioned for Ward to step aside, turning his attention to the investigation of the enemy's tactics. Analysts reviewed the perimeter, examining traces of the attackers' movements, drone footage, and sensor readings. Patterns emerged: repeated reconnaissance in the days before the attack, subtle tampering with communication lines, and attempts to exploit weak points. Ward had predicted nearly every maneuver. The evidence matched his account almost perfectly. "It's remarkable," one analyst whispered. "He anticipated every approach, every flank, every strategy. How did he know?" Tanner shook his head. "Experience, survival, the kind of training and exposure that very few get and fewer survive. He's a living blueprint for tactical foresight." Ward's mind, though exhausted from the night's siege, remained sharp. He pointed out vulnerabilities that had been overlooked, suggesting reinforcement strategies and patrol rotations to prevent future attacks. His advice was precise, practical, and rooted in experience. Soldiers who had doubted him before now followed his guidance without question, recognizing that his insight was not theoretical but proven under fire. Jacobs approached Ward privately, voice trembling with gratitude. I can't believe I doubted you," he said. "I laughed at you, we all did. And then last night you saved us all. How did you survive?" Ward's expression softened just slightly. "By focusing on what mattered, Jacobs. By refusing to let fear dictate my actions. You survive by seeing clearly, acting decisively, and trusting in preparation. And never underestimate the power of calm in chaos." Word of Ward's actions and history spread through the base. Soldiers shared stories of his precision, his foresight, and his quiet authority. Even those who had been on the front lines, face to face with the enemy, could not deny the difference he had made. Ward had become more than a sniper. He was a symbol of resilience, skill, and redemption. Briggs finally addressed the assembled officers. "We owe our survival to Ward," he said, voice solemn. "We mocked him. We doubted him. Last night he demonstrated the value of experience, patience, and skill. Let this be a lesson in judgment, in trust, and in understanding that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who ensure we live to fight another day." Ward stood quietly, eyes scanning the horizon once more. Beyond the dunes, the desert stretched endlessly, silent but always watchful. He knew the enemy was out there, regrouping, perhaps planning their next strike. His role as a guardian was far from over. But for now, the base had survived. The soldiers had learned the lesson of humility, the importance of vigilance, and the power of skill applied with purpose. As the sun climbed higher, casting the desert in harsh daylight, Ward allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He had endured captivity, torture, and years of presumed death. He had returned to save lives, to prevent history from repeating itself. And in doing so, he had reclaimed not only his own purpose, but the trust and respect of those who had doubted him. Tanner stood beside him, observing the survivors. "You've done more than survive," Tanner said quietly. "You've reminded everyone what it means to endure and to fight with purpose. You've set a standard that won't be forgotten." Ward nodded, letting the words sink in. It was not praise he sought, but acknowledgement of the lesson he had imparted. Survival is earned, trust is vital, and preparation is everything. The base slowly began to rebuild. Soldiers repaired defenses, tended to the wounded, and reinforced communication systems. Ward assisted where needed, guiding, instructing, and ensuring readiness for the inevitable future threats. His presence was steady, calm, and commanding, yet never overbearing. He was a man forged in fire and returned as a living testament to endurance and precision. As the desert heat began to rise, Jacobs found himself beside Ward once more. "Do you ever rest?" he asked softly. Ward's gaze swept the horizon. "Rest is for the dead," he said quietly. "The living must remain vigilant, but for now we survived. That is enough for today." The soldiers of the base, once skeptical, now moved with renewed determination, having witnessed firsthand the lethal precision and unwavering calm of Ward, the ghost sniper. They had learned a lesson in humility, trust, and respect, one they would carry with them far beyond the desert, far beyond the battlefield. And in the quiet moments that followed, Ward allowed himself to feel the weight of redemption, knowing that he had not only survived for himself, but had returned to ensure that others would live, learn, and endure in the harshest of circumstances. The desert was quiet now, bathed in the golden hues of late morning sun. The battle had ended, the enemy forces had retreated, and the wounded were being treated with care and precision. The soldiers who had faced near annihilation the previous night moved cautiously among the tents and bunkers, every step still heavy with adrenaline, fatigue, and disbelief. They had survived because of one man, Ward, the ghost sniper. Word of Ward's actions spread quickly across the base. From the youngest private to the most senior officer, everyone recognized the truth. Their survival, the turning of the tide, and the discipline that had preserved lives rested in his hands. And yet, Ward did not bask in recognition. He walked among the soldiers quietly, issuing precise instructions, checking defenses, and ensuring every detail was accounted for. His movements were deliberate, his gaze sharp but his demeanor calm, almost unassuming. Colonel Briggs approached him first. The man who had once doubted, mocked, and even scorned Ward now looked at him with unshakable respect. "Ward," Briggs began, voice rough with emotion, "I have failed you as a commanding officer. I doubted your abilities, ignored your warnings, and treated you as a prisoner instead of a soldier. Last night you proved your skill, your foresight, and your courage. On behalf of everyone here, I apologize. You have earned not just our trust but our deepest respect." Ward's expression remained steady, unreadable, though a faint flicker of acknowledgement passed through his eyes. "It's not about apologies," he said softly. "It's about learning. If last night taught anything, it's that preparation, vigilance, and trust can make the difference between life and death. That is the lesson I leave with you." Brigadier General Hayes, who had overseen the investigation into the attack, stepped forward as well. "Ward," he said formally, "you have demonstrated extraordinary courage, precision, and leadership under circumstances that would have broken any ordinary soldier. Your actions have saved dozens of lives, ensured the survival of this base, and redefined the meaning of heroism. On behalf of the command, you will receive full commendation for your service and unparalleled bravery." Ward inclined his head respectfully. Recognition, awards, commendations, these were foreign to him. He had endured captivity, torture, and the loss of comrades without expectation of acknowledgement. Survival had always been its own reward. Yet, hearing these words, he felt a subtle shift. The men and women around him now understood not only his skill but also the weight of the experiences that had shaped him. Private Jacob stepped forward, hesitating before speaking. "Sir, Ward," he said quietly, I want to thank you, for me, for everyone. I mocked you before, I doubted you, and I didn't understand. But last night you saved all of us. You taught me what it means to fight, to survive, and to never give up. I don't know how to repay you, but I will never forget this." Ward regarded the young soldier with steady eyes. "You repay me by surviving," he said quietly. "By learning, listening, and applying what you've seen. Survival is not a gift. It is earned every day in every decision. You honor it by living, by protecting those who cannot, and by remembering the lessons of vigilance, precision, and resilience." Tanner, standing nearby, allowed a small smile to form. He had seen Ward endure things that most could not imagine, return from the edge of death, and reclaim his purpose with unmatched focus. "You've changed this place," Tanner said. "Not with orders, not with force, but with presence, skill, and vision. You've made warriors out of ordinary soldiers and taught them the value of patience, observation, and precision. That's your legacy, Ghost." Ward nodded faintly, knowing Tanner's words were true. The night's siege, the near loss of the base, the chaos of battle, all had crystallized his role not only as a survivor but as a guardian. He had returned from death to ensure that others would live, and in doing so, he had rewritten the narrative of fear, doubt, and underestimation that had dominated his past. The soldiers, still shaken, now moved with renewed purpose. They repaired damaged fortifications, tended to the wounded, and reinforced defensive positions. Ward moved among them, a calm observer and guide, ensuring that the lessons of the siege were understood and implemented. He spoke rarely, but each word carried weight. Each action demonstrated clarity and precision. His presence alone was a stabilizing force, a reminder that even in chaos, order and survival were achievable. Briggs, reflecting on the past, approached Ward once more. "You've endured more than anyone should," he said. captured, tortured, presumed dead, and yet you return stronger, sharper, and more determined. How do you carry all of this and still function? Ward's eyes were steady, his voice quiet but firm. By focusing on the mission, on the lives that depend on me, and on the principle that survival is earned, not given. Pain and loss shape us, but they do not define the outcome. Preparation and clarity do. Outside the base, the desert stretched endlessly, silent and unforgiving. Ward stood on the perimeter, scanning the horizon as he always did, a sentinel against threats both seen and unseen. He had endured captivity, humiliation, and the assumptions of others, yet he remained resolute, aware, and unshakable. The soldiers who had once mocked him now looked to him as a guide, a protector, and a living example of resilience. Even as recognition was given, awards distributed, and commendations read, Ward's focus never wavered. He understood that the true measure of survival was not accolades, but the continued vigilance, preparation, and care for those who relied on him. Each soldier who had survived the siege carried a piece of his lesson, a fragment of his insight, and a renewed understanding of trust and respect. Jacobs, finally understanding the depth of Ward's skill, approached Tanner and said, "He's more than a sniper. He's a teacher, a guardian, someone who's been through hell and returned to guide us. I'll never forget this." Tanner nodded. "You've learned well, Jacobs. Now it's your turn to carry that forward. That's how his legacy continues, through those who survive and act with wisdom." Ward moved back toward the watchtower, a quiet figure against the rising sun, surveying the base and the dunes beyond. He knew the desert would never truly be silent, that threats would continue to emerge, and that vigilance was endless. But for now, the base had endured. The soldiers had learned humility, the value of skill, and the power of foresight. The ghost sniper's role had shifted from legend to living proof of endurance, precision, and moral courage. As the day advanced, Ward finally allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He had survived 2 years of captivity, returned from presumed death, and saved a base from near destruction. He had been mocked, doubted, and dismissed, yet he had endured and triumphed. His redemption was complete not in recognition, but in the lives he had preserved, the lessons he had imparted, and the respect he had earned. General Hayes called a final briefing. Ward's contributions were formally recognized, his actions documented in reports, and his skill commended as extraordinary. Yet Ward accepted none of the fanfare. He listened quietly, acknowledging the formalities, then returned to his role as a sentinel, not for glory, but for the ongoing duty of survival. As the soldiers moved through their routines, rebuilding, training, and reinforcing defenses, the story of Ward's return and heroism spread. The ghost sniper became more than a legend of skill. He became a symbol of resilience, precision, and the enduring power of experience tempered by moral responsibility. His story would be recounted for years to come, inspiring soldiers to trust their instincts, respect experience, and understand that survival depended on preparation, courage, and vigilance. Even as recognition faded and daily routines resumed, Ward's presence remained a stabilizing force. He had returned from the brink of death to save others, transform perceptions, and demonstrate that the impossible could be overcome through discipline, foresight, and moral clarity. His legacy, etched into the hearts and minds of every soldier who survived, would endure far beyond the desert, far beyond the siege, and far beyond the confines of the base itself. And so the ghost sniper stood watch once more, quiet, calm, and unyielding. The soldiers had learned to trust, to respect, and to survive because of him. The desert, endless and unfeeling, stretched out before him, but Ward remained vigilant, ready, and unwavering, the living testament to endurance, skill, and the quiet heroism that saves lives when it matters most. The sun climbed higher, the desert light shimmering on sand and steel, and Ward's silhouette remained steadfast against the horizon, a guardian, a survivor, and a legend reborn.